Hello and welcome to another episode of Still Processing, a 76ers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Chiavella, here as always with my guy, Sam D. Giovanni. Sam, how is this lovely Wednesday afternoon treating you?
It's doing good, man. I'm doing good. It was good to be back in the building yesterday for some very big press conferences. Not your typical, new player or returning player coming to speak. This was, pretty big deals. Both Tyrese and Paul's family were there. That was very cool to see. Plenty to talk about from those. They both obviously spoke at length. Obviously fitting for how big of occasions they both were. But yeah, man, good day yesterday, and I'm feeling good today as well. How about yourself?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Just it's just nice to be back there on occasion. The grind can you feel it at times during the season. Where you're going back and forth between 41 home games. Not counting the playoffs, and then there's practices in between, other press conferences, all that stuff. But it was nice. It had been a little bit. I think the last time we were there was for Andre Drummond and Caleb Martin
Caleb,
and Kelly Oubre.
Kelly.
Yeah. So it was nice to be back. It was a good time. What's up, Kamal? How you doing? How you doing this Wednesday? It was interesting. It was interesting to see Tyrese Maxey. I'll get on this first before we go back to Paul George. I feel like every time you see him, his body looks a little bit different. Just like
People were
progressively.
talking about it. The shoulders looking like a
He
they were
was looking
widening, man.
broad. He was looking
Yeah,
broad, and the head is as because he's looking swole. Head's looking a little small. Was
I
how
think
I
it's
kind
the
of
hair as
noticed it.
well. He
The
doesn't
hair
have like
does
the
that too.
longer
You're
hair.
right. The hair does that too.
Yeah.
He was looking good. He was looking strong, looking healthy,
Oh yeah.
obviously. Looking determined to get even better next year. Yeah, so it was encouraging to see him obviously like at this point in the off season, in such good shape. And from here, obviously the sky is hopefully the limit for the Sixers. But Maxie spoke first, so why don't we talk about him a little bit first? So obviously, great introduction by Josh Harris, Daryl Morey. Maxie spoke a little bit himself just about what kind of went into everything from the negotiation during the contract, up into leading to it, some advice that he received, and really a lot more from there. And the one thing that I've kind of been, I don't want to say stuck on, but just kind of revisiting it kind of throughout the off season. I talked to Maxie about this. We spoke separately, and then again he was asked during this interview. It's kind of been a focal point, but it's just not common for a player, and I would say especially a young player, to be able to work with their team or any team in such a capacity when it involves their money and them getting paid. It's not common for them to be like, no, that's all right. Pay me later, so we can do X, Y, or Z. We see those come up, typically a little bit later, in a star's career. We obviously Chris Bosh comes to mind, joining LeBron and Dwayne Wade, and LeBron and Dwayne, they also took a little less money, but it seems like Bosh more than anyone took that third seat there. So for Tyrese to be able, willing to do that, he didn't lose money on the deal, but that security has value in it. And I'll go even a step further. You'd have to credit Rich Paul, who, has, I would say, rightfully been criticized at times for going beyond just the best interests of his player to the point where you have to wonder if he's not acting in their best interest. Well, with Maxey, specifically, let's say, at this point in time, because I've been critical specifically of Rich Paul with how he handled Maxey during the Ben Simmons drama. And this seems night and day effectively, where he not only had Tyrese Maxey's back throughout this entire process, both, speaking with the Sixers and speaking with Maxey, giving him advice. But on top of that, he understood the situation and, really just showed, again, the word is understanding that, of what Philadelphia could accomplish. He knew that Tyrese was going to get paid and, really walked his client through that. So great job for Rich Paul. A lot of props to Maxey, who said everything kind of came down to trust between him and the Sixers. And It's kind of a unique bond of trust for Maxey and the Sixers. But that entire process, what were your thoughts on the idea? I feel like everyone kind of knew that was the plan. But what did you see from Maxey? The fact that he was willing to play along with that and let those blocks fall in that correct order.
Yeah, it was clear from the jump. I remember the reporting was, I believe, from Kyle Neubeck and Ramona Shelburne were both kind of on it first, that Maxey's not going to get his extension, but they're withholding it specifically for the purpose of maintaining this cap space. And I'm glad that Daryl, it's pretty obvious that this offseason couldn't have happened without Maxey being patient and sitting back and watching other guys like Ant Edwards and Halliburton and LaMelo Ball, and even guys who I would say, if they weren't like well above Maxey because they had made an all-star team, like they were within his caliber of up and coming players like Desmond Bain and Devin Vassell, and maybe I'm missing one more, but watching all these guys get their big contracts and him remaining patient, Daryl said plainly, this offseason doesn't happen without Tyrese, and he's obviously 100% correct. And, if he did not lose money because of how rookie contract extensions are structured, but I would say that he probably, having the breakout year, probably made him a little more money, because coming into the this upcoming season, thinking about what he might make, I was kind of considering his next contract looking something like Jordan Poole's extension with the Warriors or Tyler Heroes, where it's like, this guy can score, this guy is really good at that, but is he well-rounded enough? Is he versatile enough to be worth a max? And a lot of people, I think, including myself, before the season were like, I don't know if he's worth the max. And then he showed, hell yeah, I'm worth the max with his season. He was absolutely fantastic, and he, would have gotten a lucrative extension anyway, but he showed, like, for sure that he is a star level player, that he continues to get better in ways that not all of us can expect from him. So he definitely earned that max contract, and it's probably going to be looked at as a bargain just on, because he's already so good and he's going to get better. Max is going to be so much because of rookie extensions, but yeah, he earned that, and it was very cool to hear him be honest about the trust he had to put in the Sixers. He he talked about this, and it was kind of clear from draft day when he was so emotional about the Sixers, drafting him, and them taking a chance on him and giving him a chance to be part of a good team right away. I think his sincere appreciation for what they've done for him amid all the other drama they've had in just a few years, like, I think it really showed in him putting off the extension and letting them do this. And they rewarded him not just with the max that he earned, not just with the museum, which was really, really cool. And he said it's kind of funny to uh withhold the surprise from everyone and his whole family coming to Philly for a reason they don't know. But also for the Sixers to reward him with a really good supporting cast, with obviously him and Embiid now having Paul George, but also keeping some of their key guys, adding Caleb Martin, Andre Drummond, Eric Gordon, and now Reggie Jackson, who we'll talk about later on down the line in this episode. But the Sixers, they rewarded his patience. He absolutely deserved it. Very, unprecedented. I'm sure it has happened before. I can't name a specific example, but Tyrese deserves so much credit for giving the Sixers the chance. And obviously things broke in their direction. They took it, getting Paul George. So as Daryl said, like, it doesn't happen without Tyrese. And on top of being a great player in person, he deserves so much credit for withholding a big payday.
Oh, for sure. And part of the reason that I think it doesn't happen that often is just, how often do you have a rookie scale extension eligible player on a team that's in position to be a title contender and add a marquee free agent such as Paul George? It's the whole scenario that in and of itself is truly unique, and I think kind of lends itself to why it hasn't happened in the past exactly like this. But you brought up how the surprise. Yeah.
Real quick, also, because he was drafted so late, like, any player who gets drafted in the first 5 picks, their cap hold is too big. Maxey's was like a little bit more than like the MLE. So the fact that you can't release that, because then you lose the rights you have for that player to sign them. But the fact that he was drafted so late and had that cheap contract, that was another part of it. That part was on the Sixers for willing to take him when they did. So that part was some great work by the Sixers as well.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. They talked about how, Josh Harris mentioned how high they had Tyrese Maxey on their board. So, you have to think of a lot of things. And part of it, you can argue luck comes into play. Luck comes into play in anything. Luck comes into play winning the Super Bowl. Luck comes into play, winning an NBA championship. Like any type of success, there is a factor of luck. Uh, so the fact that Tyrese Maxey fell where he did, sure, there's an aspect of luck there, but the fact that the Sixers, according to Harris, had Tyrese Maxey so high up their draft board, and they decided let's wait, let's be patient, as opposed to trading up, kept that cap hold down, as you mentioned, and now we're in the situation that Philadelphia finds themselves in, and they've been able to sign Paul George and so on and so forth. So yeah, that cap hold that was only $13 million, that goes a long, or roundly $13 million. That goes a long way to helping Philadelphia accomplish what they did this season. So there's so many little factors at play, little things that add up over time that don't usually go Philadelphia's way. That just it broke the right way for the Sixers so far, and now it's about compiling those into results and winning a championship, obviously. But Tyrese is clearly motivated for it. One of the things that he said that he was going to be working on this offseason, because he talked, and I loved how he kind of went into it and spoke about his mentality of always getting better. He talked about his dad, called his dad crazy. I think it was 6 or 7 times. Or maybe
really
he threw the
funny.
word lunatic in there. It was great.
Yeah.
It was great. His dad's reactions were fantastic as well. But effectively, going over everything from working an 8-year-old kid out, and then after the workout, he's watching game film. And to what, like Daryl Morey said, it worked clearly. So
it did work.
Tyrese's dad has got to write a book on coaching, I guess. But that's where his work ethic comes from, according to Maxey. That drive, it's really instilled in him from his father, and now he's kind of made it his own. And so, with that going to get better every year, we've seen his shot come so far. We've seen improvement steadily each and every year as a defender, to the point where I would argue he's at least an average level defender at this point. Just when you combine not only skill and technique, but the competitive nature that he consistently plays in. He has his size limitations for sure, but again, he's come so far just based off of that level of physicality, that determination, that IQ, and the speed certainly helps on that end. But as a facilitator, he came forward a little bit ways last year, and then now this year he's talking about adding strength. Well, again, as I already alluded to, I don't think that's going to be a problem. I mean, this guy looks like he could stop a semi truck. Like, you saw the pictures flying around, and I don't know if people are, the pictures look even more drastic than he did in person. But I'll tell you,
screenshots of the stream specifically, like his shoulders really do look like Dwight Howard level shoulders.
He's looking a little like Nappa from Dragon Ball Z, like it. But what I will say is, like, he in person, he looked strong. He looked ready to go. So one area where that's going to help him, in addition to, obviously defensively and holding up his man, there's been a lot of conversation about Tyrese Maxey's driving, and, his finishing ability solid. But so often it seemed as though he was looking to draw the foul as opposed to trying to finish through. And because of that, the whistle wasn't even going his way as often as many felt that it should. So now with this increased strength, it's more opportunity to try and finish through contact against these, larger defenders, and hopefully draw some more whistles that, again, are well earned. We're not talking about foul grifting or anything like that, which, is a part of the game or whatever, but we're talking about true hard-nosed driving to the basket, stuff that Philadelphia absolutely loves. So it looks like, just based on the strength that we've seen him put on, because let's see, what's July now? How long has it been? Like 3 months since we saw him, Sam, in person at least.
So yeah,
yeah. I mean, just it's a noticeable difference. It's a very noticeable difference just looking at the strength that he's put on. So, the one thing, I don't want to be a worrywart and all that stuff, but the one thing that I wonder about is if he can maintain that top end speed with that added weight. So I have hopes for him, because, again, he was like De'Aaron Fox levels fast, one of the fastest guys in the league. So I have high hopes for it, but want to make sure that he maintains that that speed as well. What else really stood out for you from what Tyrese Maxey had to say during that press conference?
Well, one thing about the strength, I hope he's working that lower body as well to keep, his frame even and to maintain that speed. There are some cautionary tales, every player is different, but there are cautionary tales of guys like Giannis and Tatum who come into the league skinnier, then put on some weight, and it helps turn them into great battering rams that get to the basket every time, but it compromises their jump shot a bit. And for a smaller guy in Tyrese, like obviously he's going to be faster, and I think he'll be a better shooter. He was always a better shooter than they were, but I do wonder how much of that is going to, it's a sliding scale of how much you can. And so if anyone can defy it, it's Maxey based on just how much he continues to improve. So we will see about that. I think just the greatest takeaway from Maxey, again, is his appreciation for the Sixers and everybody around him. He spoke pretty highly about Paul George, but also he, made sure to mention what guys like Ben Simmons, Tobias Harris, and James Harden did for him. The part of that was because whoever asked the question, I don't remember, said, the past.
It was targeted. It was
right. Yeah.
it was very clear. Like these guys, and there were a couple questions yesterday that were like, I don't want to say shots, but that were very clear. Like not good enough. Hopefully these guys are better, but. I thought it was fantastic that he, effectively thanked guys like Tobias and Ben and everyone like that. James Harden, of course.
Yeah, and that's he's always been that type of guy, so it's no surprise whatsoever. But it's so great to see. The Josh and Daryl were asked about just his rise within the Philly fan base, and Daryl said it was a point of the museum to show Tyrese how much he meant to the city, not just the organization, but the city as well. And obviously, the love has continued to be, pouring, continuing, and obviously will only continue to grow from here. But him talking about how he seeing all the jerseys that people wearing his jerseys all the time now, how how he's exploding in popularity, and he's still you could tell he said that he wants to at least wave to them, showing at least some consideration to the people who are putting his name on their backs. It was just really cool to see that, and he's someone who I think really appreciates where he is right now, and obviously it's easy to with the NBA and whatnot, but he's worked towards this. I love the mention he made about his dad and the stories. He talked. One of the other things he wants to improve on is his mid-range shooting. He talked about that. I think some point around the playoffs of he always wanted to be a guy who shot threes and got layups. So obviously kind of an ideal Daryl Morey guy. But then he mentioned that his dad has told him you need to develop an in-between game. And I think that's really fitting for what he needs to work on, this upcoming season and going forward. Obviously he's a great shooter with the strength. He should be able to get downhill using his speed. And I think, having that counter was one of the reasons why he and the Sixers struggle without Joel. Kind of obvious, it was a tough situation regardless, but I think it did expose that him developing more counters against defenses that are going to start keying in on him even more is important, and him shouting out his dad and the hard work that he's instilled in him, it's been made pretty apparent in how he's grown for the Sixers. So again, it was really cool to hear him just kind of reflect a lot on where he's been on the journey, and I think it's just going to continue to get even better and better.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. One thing that really kind of stood out to me, and he's talked about this several times, but he talked about Joel Embiid and how Joel was the first person to, I don't want to say believe in it because he always says the Sixers showed they believe in him by drafting him, but to really kind of know that he was a star, or really kind of instill that confidence in him. And he told a story about how I think he said that they were doing they're playing running a scrimmage, and Maxey alongside some other, Jimmy Butler style, I guess. Maxey alongside some other bench guys were playing along Joel and I think some of the starters. And Maxey and the guys beat, behind on Maxey's back, beat Joel. And it seemed like that was kind of the moment that he really earned Joel's respect. And, he kind of credits that moment to, Joel then after effectively kind of taking him under his wing and constantly with the positive reinforcement of how far Maxey can go and how great that he can become. And, think about Joel as a guy who historically you haven't heard of a lot about, I want to say open leadership. It's something that's been questioned at times, and he's kind of more of a quiet guy. Keeps to himself. I mean, when he's the trolling personalities there, that's not what we're talking about. But when it comes to some of that more serious stuff, and we'll touch more on this later with Paul George, very kind of reserved guy. But with Maxey, it seems like he's been in his ear since day one, and encouraging him left and right, and really just showing that there's an immense amount of belief in him here in Philadelphia from a guy who's already established himself as a superstar. So Maxey has talked endlessly about how important that's been to his own development. I knew of Joel because he talked about it at the Maxey Museum, and I think he's talked about it a couple times after. He talked about how important Joel's kind of been instilling that confidence in Maxey. But hearing that almost like Jimmy Butler-esque story, I thought, was just an extra added strawberry on the cake of, whatever, cherry, not strawberry, on top of that entire story. So it's really nice to see, a team that has such a blend of chemistry, and especially when they've kind of gone through so much offseason change and overall, there's still a sense of chemistry, within this team. So there's going to be a piece on PSN coming soon on that. So be on the lookout for that. But, you listen to some of these guys talk, and you have everything from like Kelly Oubre's the triplet to the Martin twins. Tyrese Maxey said to me earlier this year about how important it was to have Kelly Oubre in the locker room, and then Oubre kind of reflected that back at him during the media availability after he re-signed. Joel and Paul George, and this is what we're going to talk about next in a little bit. Paul George's own words that Joel Embiid, is one of his best friends at All-Star games. After years of both of them kind of being recluses in a way. So to have all this kind of chemistry back and forth, and Reggie Jackson, the new guy, he's played 170 games with Paul George. That being something. Andre Drummond's been in Philly before. He's played with Embiid before. Those guys have, patched things up or whatever. There's pairings like left and right of these little connections, between so many of the guys on the roster already, but then also with some of the new guys that have been brought in. I mean, even Eric Gordon, there was a short time that he and Paul George crossed paths. Obviously, he has the connection with Daryl Morey. And, you can kind of just go on and on about some of these connections. And you have guys who are also taking each other under their wings. Obviously, we just talked about Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. Maxey, again, started talking about, his relationship with Ricky Council, which has been, I would say like that kind of next generation. You have Embiid to Maxey, now Maxey to Council. And now Council's even said that he's getting ready to start being a leader in his own right and start leading some of these guys as well. So it's really just encouraging to see, because that's the one thing you worry about with a very, change heavy roster heading into a new year. It was like, well, what does the chemistry look like? Well, we still have to see it on the court, but off the court, everything's looking great so far. I mean, is that something that you've noticed, Sam, that kind of generalized chemistry that these guys seem to have, tend to, in my opinion, at least enjoy each other's company and have that ability to click?
Yeah, I do. And it was awesome to hear Maxey talk about texting Ricky Council and saying how he wants to be a leader for the young guys. But even he mentioned that he's young, but not as young. He had like a good laugh about that, because it's crazy that I'm pretty sure he's the second longest tenured Sixer, right? There's no one even close to, obviously, Joel. And then, right?
There's
Especially
no
with Tobias out of town now, and Paul Reed. Yeah.
And
That's
for
just crazy to think
Korkmaz.
about now. And come back to the NBA, King. But it was cool also to hear, obviously Maxey wanting to, now that he's one of the veterans on the team, mentoring some of the younger guys. I'm sure he'll be a great mentor for Jared McCain as well. Maxey also mentioned Kyle Lowry. He said a lot of good things about Paul George, but when he was asked about the role players, also said, he spoke on their value as well. And he mentioned Lowry specifically as someone who, he said this about his dad too, gave him a lot, put a lot on his plate, really pressured him to keep working, made him, learn a lot of stuff, was in his face a lot. And I think Maxey, appreciating that and that showing in his work as like he continues to grow. Like, it really is great to have, some of that tough love. It seems to really pay off. And so to have Lowry back, to have Kelly back, it's uh, combining some of that continuity that Joel has spoken about previously, and has always like hoped to have, like with all the turnover on the Sixers. It's good to have at least with Tyrese. He'll be, even if it's a new role that he's got to learn with again for a second season, like having him back, having Kelly back, Kyle, even KJ Martin for however long he's here. And then also some of the new guys coming in already having experience together. Paul George has played with Eric Gordon, even just a little bit. Kelly and Caleb have known each other for a while, even if they just missed each other in their stints in Charlotte. Even Reggie Jackson played with the Clippers, played even with Andre Drummond back in the day on Detroit. Drummond, obviously being a former Sixer, is probably the
Was he in OKC when Paul George was?
No, he was only in OKC for a few years, and then he was in Detroit while Paul George was in Indiana. I'm pretty sure.
So those 170 games were all with LA then that they shared, because
Yeah,
they played
yeah.
170
Reggie was in
together.
LA for a little bit. Mm-hmm.
That's a
I
long
wonder
time in one
was
group.
Gordon was that the portion where Gordon was with the half a season, or no? Reggie's been on he was on the Nuggets for the past 2 years,
I
so I
think
don't think so.
I think they just missed each other, because I
Yeah.
want to say that 2 years ago, that's when Eric was traded, or was it a buyout midseason, and he ended up with LA, and that was when Reggie actually left LA and went to Denver.
Right. So but still, just having all this overlap is super super helpful, I think, and for at least the main guys on the Sixers to be locked in. Joel's now the next one to have his contract situation. He's eligible for an extension soon. I don't think just yet, but the fact that he's going to have Maxey to continue to play with, some of the other key role players. Obviously, he's going to be with Paul George, someone who he already has familiarity with through his times with the All-Star games, which we'll get into in a little bit. And even the new guys coming in having some familiarity. And some of that, I think, is just it's the NBA. There's a lot of movement nowadays. And with the AAU circuits and stuff, I'm sure there's some overlap anywhere on any given team. But still, it's foreign more so for the Sixers because of all the drama they've had with co-stars and reshuffling players and all that stuff. So, it's definitely good to have for sure. And something a little new in Philly that hopefully won't be as much of a topic talked about going forward because it's just the standard now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Nick Hershier checks in. What's up, Nick? How you been, man? We actually changed the name. Well, we're 30 episodes in. I can tell you that much. I can't tell you a time, but we're 30 episodes in. So, new pod, new name, new co-host. Justin's still here, just not here tonight. But yeah, no, rocking forward from this moment on with still processing and yeah, always will be. But excited to have you check in the chat there. So it wasn't just Tyrese Maxey, and maybe before we get on to Paul George, just super quick, Nick Nurse did speak. That was kind of an impromptu thing in between Tyrese Maxey, excuse me, in between Tyrese Maxey and Paul George. Any major takeaways that you had from what Nick had to say to us? He only spoke real briefly to us.
Yeah, not too much. I liked some of the initial things that he said about working the big three together, willing to do some experiments, which kind of an obvious point, with such a new roster and coming into a new season. He said he was writing his ideas down in pencil, which I think is good. He and Paul George were asked about training camp and how important that will be. So obviously, having that will be super super important as everyone learns to mesh into this new roster. Nothing too big from Nick. He shouted out Caleb and Kelly as dynamic wings, so I'm interested to see how he utilizes them. What about you? Anything stand out from you, from Nick?
There was one thing, right? So I was trying to get right in the beat and get this question out there, and someone beat me to the punch. But I'm glad it was asked at the very least. Somebody asked about the opportunity for some of the younger guys, because there's obviously an opportunity for some of the veterans. And it wasn't just that he answered the question, but honestly, Nick Nurse had a kind of like a look on his face, like his eyes kind of like popped, and there was a little like excitement behind it, which I didn't expect. And he said, "Yeah, no, there's gonna be opportunity for these guys." And the first guy that you think in your head, well, Ricky Council, he's been proving himself more and more. We saw him already kind of earn that trust last season. But there's gonna be opportunity for some of these guys. I've been saying this since he was drafted. but Adembona is probably going to get minutes for the Sixers. Now, is he going to get playoff minutes? Barring a Joel Embiid injury, no.
Not.
But, yeah, exactly. You don't necessarily want a rookie, especially a rookie big man, in that kind of situation. But there's going to be games that Joel Embiid misses. Andre Drummond is going to get the starts those nights. Nick Nurse alluded to that in that little – they put us in like a hallway, I think a very small hallway. But so in this hallway meeting that we had that was very hot, that was one of the things that he talked about was, that Andre Drummond is going to get these minutes. And so just, by the logical following of that, this is not a very big Sixers roster. There's going to be some opportunity for Adembona in the regular season. And then obviously there's Jared McCain, who with the signing of Reggie Jackson, is there going to be a lot of minutes at the point for him? Probably not. But it kind of is pointing to the idea of them utilizing him as an off-ball shooter this season, which for his rookie year, a role that he's accustomed to, he did that on a big stage at Duke. Yeah, it's a little bit exciting. So it's nice to know that there's not this, how do I say this politely? Just aversion to playing youth that we've seen in Philadelphia and that now can be seen in Milwaukee over the years. It's just nice to know that that's not going to be something for the Sixers going forward and that we're going to see some time for that. We're going to get more into Reggie Jackson later. So, Nick, I'll get to your question about that then. But let's just move on briefly to Paul George.
Sorry, one quick thing from Nick Nurse before. One other thing that stood out, he was asked about Joel playing for Team USA, and I guess part of this is kind of like an obvious thing that he's going to say because he's not going to speak badly on his star playing in the Olympics, but he obviously has experience coaching the Canadian team as well, so he obviously has that going for him, and he did speak positively about Joel being on Team USA. He mentioned a lot of the good things about it, being around such great players and coaches, having the chance to play in such highly competitive games. I mean, Team USA has had some scares already in the showcases. And, as it's been seen, like when guys are playing for their home countries, like the motivation is there and then some. So guys are always motivated to go super hard, especially at Team USA, who walks around with a house-sized target on all their backs because they're always seen as like the team to beat. Mentioned Joel getting the chance to stay in shape, continue his conditioning, his game shape in these super competitive games as another positive as well. So that was pretty cool to hear. With obviously plenty of back and forth ideas about is it good, is it bad? And again, I don't think Nick is in any position to say it's bad if he thinks so, but he spoke pretty positively about that in a way that was obviously pretty legitimate. And with the Olympics starting soon, the real games are coming. So it'll be very interesting to see how Team USA does and see Joel and all the very positive and honest discourse about him. You can always count on Twitter to be honest and appreciative of Joel Embiid. That is for sure.
Yeah. He got quite the warm reception in France when they got there.
Yeah, that was disgusting, dude. Yeah, fuck that. Fuck the French fans, man.
Yes.
Yes. But get out of here with that guy. Like, stop. Relax. And your team is good anyway. France is really good too. Like, what do you?
Yeah, you got Victor Wembanyama and you have Rudy Gobert. Like, where did you want to play? Yeah. Are you running Victor at the 3? Like, what did you want so badly? Out of this? And again, like, if there's
that's entitlement. That's crazy entitlement from
it is. It is. First of all, no one has the right to feel entitled to have Joel Embiid play for their team because of the fact that he is a citizen of 3 different countries. But as much as I would say Cameroon would have much more of an argument than the French. Oh, yeah. Joel has spent almost an equal portion of his life in the United States. The majority of his adult life the entirety of his adult life in the United States. His son was born here. He was married here. It makes a lot of sense that he played for the U.S. As an American, I'd have no problem if he played for Cameroon. I would understand that decision. A lot of different things you can go into. His family, some of which are still in the Cameroon. Obviously, growing up living there. But who doesn't have a right to complain about this whole entire thing? The French. It makes absolutely no sense. There's he said that he wanted to play for France because France actually was going to make the Olympics, and it seemed like his only opportunity at the time. Like, it is what it is. Play with your team, use it as fodder, bulletin board material, whatever. If you eventually play the United States, but this dehumanizing things being said left and right, and it being on Twitter is nothing new. Like that happens
Yeah,
every day
nothing new.
to effectively everyone. Still
Yeah.
disgusting, but now to see this like in a live environment is
Very
just
trashy.
it's another extra discouraging thing. So hopefully we don't see anything completely out of pocket during these
Yeah,
games, because
fingers crossed.
that's the one remaining thing, is to see people live at these games. And we've seen stuff like that even in Philadelphia, where all it takes is one asshole to do something effectively unforgivable, and that awful things. So hopefully we don't even have to worry about that. Hopefully we can keep it to words, and keep the words to competitive, and not malicious, and don't be racist assholes. That's just don't do that. It's just not a good thing. So anyway, Olympics coming up. That's going to be fun. But there was one more person who spoke yesterday at the press conference. Guy by the name of Paul George, if you heard of him. And I thought his was very insightful. So this is the first time that I've really heard him speak at length, not in a podcast format, right? So for me, it was really interesting, and it was an opportunity just to kind of learn a bit more about him and his personality, and how he acts. And the one major takeaway that I had from the entire uh, interaction is just that, well, this is a smart guy who knows how to say the right things. And I don't say that in a negative, like, well, he said the right thing, now he has to go out and do it. I mean, obviously he has to, but I don't say it as a detractor. I say it as, this is a guy who's very self-aware. This is a guy who is ready to, based on his words, commit whatever he has to this team, mentality. He has an understanding of this team's ability, if everybody's working on their maximum ability. And on top of that, he has an understanding of what about this team needs to change. And it's not in a me-centric way. It's in a preserving Joel Embiid way. So before we kind of get into the entirety of his conversation, the one thing I wanted to start with is obviously when he kind of spoke to Nick Nurse during his press conference, and he started saying how you don't really want Joel. I have the specific quote around here somewhere, but basically, you don't want him playing hero ball at the top of the key. Was the conversation that he had? There's so much that Joel does that, and you've heard him speak on this himself. Where he kind of has this immense pressure on him, and that can lead to some of these injuries that we've seen. Is that the only reason that Joel Embiid has suffered multiple injuries throughout his career? No, it's not. But relieving that pressure certainly has a chance to help. So what Paul said was, we don't want to see him isolated at the top of the key. And he said that directly to Nick Nurse, and there's a little bit of a chuckle. But yeah, he's aware of what has to change in this offense. And it's clearly in his mind, the solution isn't, well, I need to be the alpha. It's no, we need to all figure this out together. So that's what really impressed me. And something that maybe a pleasant surprise is too far, because I expected him to, he presents himself very well all the time. But I was encouraged to hear that. What really stood out to you, Sam, in his presser?
So coming into it, I was kind of just thinking about how a lot of his, him coming to the Sixers, it broke a certain way because of what happened with the Clippers, which he was asked about, and he said all the right things. Said, made the split to be pretty amicable, pretty friendly. Like, he had some very good words to say about Steve Ballmer, about Lawrence Frank, and appreciated that they simply gave him the chance to play for his hometown team.
He did take one barb at the Clippers. Talking
Was
about
that
the second, it's
yeah,
factual, but talking about the second team, to the Lakers, it was
yeah.
factual. It may not have been malicious. It was a little bit of a barb.
Right, for sure. But he does seem like someone who is very appreciative for his the chance he has with Philly. He did speak pretty, openly about not having to be the guy there, which something he also spoke about in LA. I found it funny, the line about Joel too. I mean, you still want him kind of operating out of that high post, but not necessarily always hunting for a shot. And Paul George, someone who can really diversify the offense, give them a lot of different looks because of his shooting, his ability to score on top of Max and all the other guys they have. So even if it is Joel still operating from the nail, which is where he should for all the reasons of why he's been, this MVP level guy in the past few years. But yeah, Paul definitely seems like someone who, like he said, he knows his role, but he also knows that he can be a closer when needed. So I'm sure there's maybe a little bit of a pecking order in those close game situations that they'll have to work through. Some growing pains there, I'm sure, but just about it's better to have more of those options than less. And I think he'll definitely be a guy who can go and get a tough shot, or at least make be someone who the defense can't send another defender off of, because if you give him an open three, he's shooting and he's probably going to make it. There was a lot of good, discussion about him coming to Philadelphia for the first time. He seems to understand all the pressure he's going to face, and at the outset does not seem daunted by it. Obviously, he wouldn't be, or else he wouldn't have angled so heavily to come here. But will be interesting to
It's the
see.
city of brotherly love. It's how
Yeah,
back can it
that was
be?
a good line. That was a good line, and him mentioning the dinners, the cheesesteaks, that was all really good stuff too. So obviously a lot of positivity at the forefront, and Josh Harris and Daryl Morey spoke positively about getting a guy like that, which is really really big. The fact that even if it was a certain way that it happened, and there were not a whole lot of suitors, the fact that a guy like Paul George chose the Sixers speaks to where the franchise is going. And even as he, exits his prime years, I think he'll be a really, really good fit. And what we'll, talk more of, I'm sure, is the fact that he has such a deep connection with Joel already that I didn't think a lot of people knew about. Speaks to him wanting to come here, and puts the Joel going on NBA Countdown during the finals in a bit of a different light as well. It wasn't just someone random, coming in and angling, add some pieces. Like, it was someone who had like a good relationship with this guy, and so them going back a few years added like another layer to it that made me appreciate it even more.
Yeah, I mean, how many years have effectively everyone, fans, people in the media, complained about Joel not recruiting effectively, like
Mm-hmm.
not being that friendly guy, not establishing himself as the guy that people want to come and play with. And like, listen, guys' personalities are their personalities. You can't completely, and Philadelphia, this is where this conversation happens all the time, often around Jalen Hurts or Joel Embiid. So you don't want the guy to be fake. Him being, Fugazi is not really good for anybody. But at the same time, this is a way that we've seen him kind of make that change, reach that level of maturity. Speaking of Joel Embiid, in a way that's still honest and true to himself. So, he found another kind of like-minded guy in Paul George. Paul really kind of specified how they're really kind of similar in that way. They're not, which is funny for a guy who has a national podcast that he constantly is having other NBA players on. But he's not, according to himself, he's not that guy who, is out socializing with every guy in the NBA or anything like that. So, to have that opportunity for two like-minded guys in a similar position to have that conversation, strike that friendship years ago. And, as Paul George said, really since that, it kind of felt inevitable that they'd meet up, as teammates at some point. So super encouraging to hear that, because again, that just speaks even further to that chemistry that is potentially budding on this team, or, at least seems to be. So definitely super encouraging. And the other thing that I think kind of came across, Paul is very interested in being coached from Nick Nurse by the way that he made everything sound. And there's times where you bring in a star personality and there's that concern of, maybe this guy wants to do things his own way. Again, we haven't seen anything yet. All this remains to be seen. Nick Nurse himself was very candid in terms of how these pieces fit. It's like, well, I got to get them all on the court. Very understandable, but just operating off the known information, which at this point is just what Paul had to say. It's very encouraging that, it seems that Paul is not just here to, coast throughout his golden years and, score points when he feels like it and win more games and gain more notoriety or this, that, the other, make a lot of money, obviously. But there seems to be a real concerted effort for him to contribute in a meaningful way to an NBA championship, which is obviously the end goal for everybody involved in this situation. So I thought that was, particularly interesting to hear from him, just because, again, that's something that I think has been a concern for a lot of people, and you hear that coming a lot from Clippers fans. But it's just something that a lot of people have brought up, is just this idea of PG kind of being a coaster, or this, that, or whatever. But so far in Philadelphia, he's gotten off on the right foot and just said everything that he's needed to say.
Yeah, the part about Joel I think stood out the most for sure. And I went back to look at this. So Joel's made the last 7 All-Star games, but he hasn't been at every single one of them. And Paul George has missed a few of those years. So they've only had, by my count yesterday, 3 to really connect. 2 of them were they were on the same roster, which I don't know how much that really means because the All-Stars were all together the whole weekend anyway. But it really does show like the deep connection that they have. And Joel, being an introverted guy a lot of the times, like the fact that he opened up to Paul and said, by Paul's recollection was, "Hey man, I really appreciate our friendship, and whatever happens, I still want to be like a good friend of yours." And Paul used the word deep. He said that they hadn't really connected on that level before, and so Joel, putting himself out there, led himself to having a good friend who was an established star by the time he started becoming an all-star. And now the fact that they're teammates, the stars kind of aligned, and I'm sure that was a very, very big reason why PG wanted to come here, to have to keep that friendship going, to have the chance to team up with him, a guy who he's spoken about very positively as a player. That was really, really cool to hear that, again, because of all the worries about Joel not being a big recruiter, not being someone who puts himself out there, does enough tampering. Like, it's great to see that this was a change of his, and I'm sure his connection with Paul George made him more comfortable to go on NBA Countdown and hint not so subtly that, hey, be the Sixers, we should go get you. So that was very cool to hear. And the part about Nick Nurse, I agree. Paul said something along the lines of, Kawhi spoke pretty highly of him, and when Kawhi speaks, you listen, which I think was a pretty good kind of double entendre there. Of everyone's waiting to see what Kawhi talks about because he's always monotone and whatnot. But yeah, I think that Nick is a guy that a lot of guys seem to want to play for. Obviously, the fact that he's a champion, the fact that he has coached in a lot of different places, that experience, that resume speaks for itself. And for all the fallout that Paul George had with the Clippers, again, by his recollection, it seemed like they're still in a good place. He and Kawhi didn't seem like there's any major fallout there. And so the fact that he respected Kawhi's opinion so much, like, obviously makes sense. But that's another thing that the Sixers had going for them, is they have this coach who has plenty of respect. I'm sure Paul George and Kyle Lowry have overlapped All-Star games too, and Kyle having so much experience with Nick as an assistant and head coach seems to go in his favor as well. So yeah, those were definitely 2 of the other big things that that Paul said. Someone that he knows pretty well, and someone that he is still getting to know. I had the quote as well for what he said about getting to know Nick. I can't find it, whatever. But Nick also spoke highly about Paul. He had a lot of good things to say about what it's been like getting to know him. Nick said that Paul is a good guy, very intelligent, thoughtful about what he wants out of the team, what he can deliver, and what he wants the team to be about, which I think really showed in Paul's words about wanting to step back at certain times, not always wanting to have the ball, saying that there's no ego when it comes to him, and focusing on winning. And obviously that stuff kind of goes without saying anyway, but the fact that he is, making it clear, and I'm sure it will be clear when they hit the floor, that it's not going to be the Paul George show. He's going to come in and, obviously Nick has plenty of planning to do with his coaching staff about what the team will look like, but it sounds like Paul George's game for whatever that is. So just another reason that, again, the guys who know each other, the players, and Paul coming into a new coach, a new coaching staff that he hasn't worked with yet, but still getting off on the right foot. So there's obviously, plenty of reason for optimism at the outside.
I do wonder, and I thought about asking this because I don't know if he specifically said this. He talked about, listening when Kawhi speaks and everything like that. I do wonder what Kawhi had to say about Nick Nurse, and if they, specifically did discuss that. It's that it's something I may ask him that at some point. But kind of earlier we were talking about luck and what kind of a role that plays in everything, and specifically relating to Tyrese Maxey. But you brought up Joel showing up, live on TV next to Paul George, at the NBA Finals. Shout out Tim Bontemps. How lucky of a situation that he runs into Joel Embiid in the bathroom, happens to mention Paul George is there, and the rest is history.
He was there at the press
just
conferences yesterday. I'm sure he was thinking, like, yeah, I did this. This is my work. Looking at Daryl like, you're welcome, buddy.
Yeah. Tim is I don't know him that well, but
does he get a spot on the parade float if they win it all? Does he get a spot on the parade float?
I mean, at this point, he's done a hell of a lot more for the team than I have.
He's one of the architects. He did. It's not insignificant.
No, exactly. So, that was Josh Harris himself even said, like, what sealed the deal?
Yeah.
Paul George coming to Philadelphia was the wink. He said it jokingly.
Yeah,
but,
he said it all started with the side eye. That was good.
Exactly. Flying out Dr. J probably helped, but there's no, it was.
That's what something Paul said on his podcast was a big thing.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that Paul has a good amount of respect for some of the past greats. Dr. J being involved in all of this meant a lot to him. He picked 8, which 13 and 24 were unavailable. I asked him about picking 8. 13 was unavailable, 24 is unavailable. He told, I think it was ESPN previously, that he picked 8 because of Kobe. And, he has an immense amount of respect for Kobe. He talked about how Kobe was his inspiration for picking up the ball in the first place as a kid in Southern California. And so it just made sense for him to pick 8 because of that inspiration that Kobe was to him, because 13 and 24 were not available, but 8 was. And Kobe being a Philadelphia guy, like it was the perfect storm effectively. So he said on multiple occasions about multiple all-time greats, just what an impact that they've had on him personally. So it was just super interesting to hear him talk. And I'm looking forward to hear a lot more from him this season. So we did say that we were going to talk about Reggie Jackson. We are kind of coming up against it. I think we're going to table Reggie Jackson until Monday, because I want to dive a little bit more into how the rotation might look and what minutes distribution and everything like that. Because I think there's a little more meat on the Reggie Jackson bones than just, hey, they signed a point guard to the minimum. So we're going to table that for now. But do you have any closing thoughts just on Paul George, lasting impressions, anything like that?
Nothing too strong. Again, it was very cool to see his entire family out there with him. Pretty big move. The furthest east he's going to play basketball in his whole life. So with a brand new team, some guys he's familiar with, some guys he's not. But again, at the outset, it seems like he's really willing to take on the role the team needs of him. Knows when he can turn it on. And I still don't think they're on the level of the Celtics, and I think right now, as currently constructed, they're still kind of in a back and forth with the Knicks for who should be regarded as the second best team in the East. But having Paul George will make the Sixers much, much better, again, even as he ages. So I'm very excited to see how it all looks together on the court.
Well, that was one thing that Daryl Morey spoke about, during the entire process as well, was that this roster, like Daryl Morey's rosters every season, is not yet finished. If I was a betting man, I would say that it's probably going to look different between now and when the postseason, or it's definitely going to look different between now and when the postseason begins. So Morey said that they are going to head in the season with an open roster spot, which is not untypical for him. So it's going to be interesting to see what they can do around the trade deadline. A lot more flexibility than some other teams, just because of the way that they have successfully navigated this CBA. But it's super interesting, and we'll see what happens from here on out. But the one thing that I do want to say, you brought up Paul George's family. He's moving away from his home in California, and there were so many of his family members there. And they, like, a large majority of them, like all the kids, decked out in Sixers gear, which that was just awesome to see. Like there's posturing, and then that just seems so much more sincere than just regular posturing.
Getting your
to me.
family to
Yeah.
posture is kind of far out there. I don't know if they're willing to do that. Like him mentioning cheesesteaks is
Exactly.
one thing, but the George family coming with some Sixers gear on already is another.
It seems like there's palpable excitement about this move, which it's super encouraging. So yeah, we're gonna have a lot more Paul George stuff to talk about. Basketball is slowly but surely coming back to Philadelphia. Come Monday, which is probably gonna be our next show if we go back to we're trying to go to our regular scheduled time again. Come Monday, we'll talk some Reggie Jackson, probably talk some Olympics, a little bit of Joel Embiid update, and make sure that everything is okay with the big man out in France. But for now, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening. We really appreciate it. Follow us on Twitter at ProcessingPod76. Find us on the Philly Sports Network YouTube channel. Be sure to like and subscribe. We're on Spotify, Apple Music, everywhere there. So share, like, subscribe, any little bit of assistance. We appreciate it. And we just thank you so much again for listening and joining us for another episode of Still Processing, a 76ers podcast.